Good day. My name is Mr. Anker and welcome to today's lesson on English Home Language. Today we'll be focusing specifically on the novel essay question. This is today's lesson map. We'll be looking at terminology, basic analysis of the novels, approaching the question, and some answering techniques. By the end of the lesson, we will address the following: how to interpret essay questions based on the terminology used in the question. So by looking at the questioning verbs. Answering techniques. How to construct a literary essay. How to analyze a novel according to a question. How to summarize the main ideas and formulate an argument. And then how to use the Peel method effectively. What you should know and be able to do. You should know the questioning verbs and how to approach a literary essay. You must also be able to construct a thesis statement, or it is known as the topic sentence. You must know the novel extremely well, the basic aspects of the novel, such as the setting, the characters, the themes, and the plot. You must be able to use the Peel method successfully, and you must be able to formulate in a precise and detailed manner so that you adhere to the word count. Often essays that are too long lack coherence and become muffled. Common content errors and misconceptions that are made when writing English Home Language Paper 2. Learners present a superficial retelling of the story. So that means you regurgitate and narrate the plot and don't actually answer the question. Additionally, a marking guideline of the previous year was studied and forced upon the current essay topic. So often learners work on past papers and then they regurgitate the memorandum of those past papers and try and fit it to the new essay question. This is incorrect, as that is not the information that it is expected of you for this specific question, the current examination. Many essays were narrative and did not formulate an argument. So a narrative essay means that you are simply retelling the story and not addressing the question. Learners repeated the question statement as an introduction, as well as the end of each paragraph, which was extremely monotonous. So it means it was mundane, it was quite boring. Inadequate or vague references were made to the text to support the argument being developed. Substantiation must be specific and relevant. So you must have the correct ideas to support your argument, and they must be grounded within the text. Writing the essay and then rewriting it does not constitute planning and is the reason for some candidates not completing the paper. So by writing a draft of your essay and then writing the final, that is not sufficient planning. Planning means that you're making a spider diagram and you are laying out your ideas clearly so that a coherent essay can develop from that. Many learners use language very carelessly. So you're making errors with the capitalization of words, getting quotations, using the wrong punctuation for quotations, and then also not using the apostrophe. Remember, an apostrophe has two functions: contraction and possession. In some cases, basic plot details were not known and characters were incorrectly identified. This would suggest that candidates had not read the prescribed texts. There was an over-reliance on summaries, so Spark Notes and Wikipedia, and form versions of the texts. These are just some of the competencies and skills that you require in order to write a successful English Home Language Paper 2. Now, before we delve any deeper into the Pacific Ocean like pie, let's take a quick commercial break. Welcome back. Now, let's start looking at some basic terminology. Critically discuss. That means to weigh up the strength and weaknesses of an idea or statement. Critically comment means to make logical connections between the ideas and offering your own perspective based on thorough evaluation. Validity means to determine how truthful a statement is in order to determine its credibility. And justify means to give reasons. Now, here are some of the building blocks for literary interpretation. Firstly, the setting. That is the context based on the time and the place of a story. Characters. Those are the individuals that create the action within the story. Plot. The sequence of events that make up the story. So how the story progresses. Theme. The underlying message or the main idea within the story. Conflict. The central struggle or problem that drives the plot forward. Narrative. The point of view from which the story is told. So who is the narrator of the story? And then 7, literary devices. Techniques that enhance the storytelling, like imagery or symbolism. Now, let's start analyzing these novels on a basic level. So for Life of Pi, the setting is different according to the 3 parts of the novel. So it starts off in part 1 in Pondicherry, India. Part 2 moves to the Pacific Ocean. And then part 3 moves to Mexico. Also, there is references to Canada, where the adult Pi tells the story to the fictional author. These are some of the characters. We've got Pi Patel, we've got the fictional author, Richard Parker, Geeta Patel, who's orange juice in the second story, the French cook, the hyena, the Taiwanese sailor, the zebra, Santosh Patel, Ravi Patel, the Japanese investigators, and so on. This is the basic plot of Life of Pi. Life of Pi by Jan Martel follows Pi Patel, a young vegetarian Indian boy stranded on a lifeboat in the Pacific Ocean after shipwreck. He shares the boat with a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. He descends into savagery as a means of survival. He ultimately survives and lands on Mexican shores. These are the major themes: survival, faith and religion, storytelling, and then faith versus reason, or science. Conflict. The central struggle is Pi being lost at sea on a lifeboat with animals and the internal and external strife he has to overcome to ultimately survive. So strife means the obstacles that he has to overcome. The narrator. There are 3 narrators. We've got the fictional author, we've got the adult Pi, and we've got the younger Pi. Now, let's look at a basic analysis of a picture of Dorian Gray. The setting is London primarily. Then we've got Dorian Gray's lavish townhouse, Basil Hallward's studio, he's an artist, Lord Henry Wotton's home, the opium dens when Dorian becomes very deplorable, and the countryside estate. These are our major characters: Dorian, Lord Henry, Basil, Sybil, James Vane, and Alan Campbell. The plot. Dorian is gifted a painting by Basil. He falls in love with the youth and the beauty in the painting and makes a Faustian bargain. So a Faustian bargain is when you sell your soul to the devil. And in this case, Dorian sold his soul to the devil to have eternal youth and beauty. He remains physically youthful while his portrait ages and reflects his moral corruption. This leads to his eventual downfall and self-destruction. Ultimately, he stabs at the painting, which then results in him dying. The major themes are corrupting influence of beauty, the moral decay and consequences of a hedonistic lifestyle. So a hedonistic lifestyle is one that falls prey to debauchery and having a promiscuous life. The superficiality of society, the influence and manipulation, And lastly, art and aestheticism versus morality. Aestheticism is the obsession with beauty and seeing beauty as superior to all other qualities. Then, the conflict is Dorian's struggle between preserving his youthful beauty and the moral consequences of his increasingly corrupt and hedonistic lifestyle. And then we have a third-person narrator. So we have the omnipresent narrator telling the story. Now, let's look at how to approach these questions. When you write an essay, these are some of the problems. Learners often just narrate the entire plot instead of addressing the topic. The introduction and body paragraphs and conclusion is often not structured correctly, resulting in an incoherent essay. Owing to poor mind mapping and a lack of planning, the essay lacks content and structure. Learners also fail to provide textual evidence to support their arguments. You will be expected to write a coherent and well-developed essay. Thus, you must ensure that your essay is well-planned to ensure that your ideas are not muffled. Writing a draft and just rewriting to present as a final copy is not planning. To answer the questions, you must know what to expect. So, paper 2 totals to 80 marks. You will be required to answer questions from 3 of the sections. You must answer 2 scene poems and a compulsory unseen poem for 30 marks. Then it is expected to write a literary essay on one genre and to do a contextual on another. One question will be the literary essay. If you decide to do the novel essay, you must do the drama contextual and vice versa. Try and adhere to the word count of 400 to 450 words. How to approach a literary essay. A literary essay is a reasoned response to a question or statement on a work of literature. You may agree or disagree, and you may even provide a mixed response to the topic. It's all about how you substantiate and support your viewpoint on the topic. The style of the essay is formal. I've even capitalized formal. You have to avoid colloquial language. For example, the writers like saying things, that guy, and use contractions, for example, can't. All of this lapses into informality and makes your essay less convincing. Also try and stay clear of using the personal pronoun I. It is evident that, not I will discuss. Study the topic carefully and underline keywords with a highlighter within your question. It is imperative that you engage with the question asked. You have to work on a mind map. You have to structure your essay according to Peel, and you should write your essay lastly. Read the question very carefully, then underline the keywords of the topic. If the question is requiring you to address 2 aspects, ensure that both are addressed. For example, Pi must rely on faith in all forms to overcome the ordeal he experiences. So here we are going to discuss the reliance on faith, and secondly, we are going to discuss the ordeals he had to overcome. Do you agree with the statement? Justify your response by close reference to the text. You need to decide whether you agree with the statement and to what extent. Work on the mind map. Brainstorm all your ideas. In this case, write down all the reasons why you agree or disagree with the topic. Structure your ideas. Once you have all your ideas, you can start evaluating which ones you think will be best. Prepare your evidence. Next to each of your major points, put examples from the novel play that support your argument. And then decide on the paragraphs. Put your ideas all in order. Now, this is an example of a Life of Pi spider diagram of how you're going to plan it. You have your topic, your introduction, your first paragraph, your second, your third, and then your conclusion. And then you will do the same if you chose to do the Dorian Gray novel. Now, to structure your essay coherently, we are going to use PEEL. PEEL stands for point. So you are stating your point. Then you are explaining your point. Then you are providing evidence. And lastly, you are linking it back to the essay question. Now, let's quickly take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with answering techniques. Welcome back. Now, let's look at some answering techniques. So, the writing process. So, this is how you structure your introduction. Firstly, make a broad statement, so a general statement that introduces the topic. This could be by defining a specific term within the question, so providing a definition of something within the question, or by using a quote that is appropriate to the topic and then contextualizing its relevancy. So if, for example, you are doing Life of Pi and the question is asking you something in regards to faith, and you want to start off with the quote, I know a story that will make you believe in God. After using that quotation, you need to give it context, and you need to say, this is what Mamaji says to the fictional author in Pondicherry, and starts the entire story. In a single sentence. So in a single sentence, you will contextualize that quote that you use. That is the first step. The second step is that you have to give your thesis statement. So you are going to provide your stance and your opinion on the question that you were asked. And then lastly, you are going to list how your argument is going to develop, right? So you are going to state how your argument will ensue, which means to develop, right? Now, let's look at an example of this in practicality. So, reason is the power to think logically and to consider the effects before acting. Faith, on the other hand, is a belief in a higher power. So what did we do? This is our broad statement. We have defined the terms reason and faith, and that is how we opened up our essay. Now, in Life of Pi, Martel uses various characters and incidents to demonstrate how reason and faith, which are key themes of the novel, coexist. And here we have the thesis statement. Now remember, your thesis statement is going to be loosely based on your question. And our question is, the novel Life of Pi suggests that despite offering contradictory approaches to life, reason and faith can coexist. And we've proven that and incorporated that when we did our broad statement. We defined reason, we defined faith, and now we are also using it to base our thesis statement on. Now we are going to discuss how our essay will develop and what our body paragraphs are going to be. The two Mr. Kumars represent the merging of science and religion, or reason and faith. So this is going to be our first body paragraph. In addition, Pi's journey at sea shows how he applies the coexistence of reason and faith in order to survive. So here, this is going to be our second body paragraph. This essay will show that although these might appear to be contradictory concepts, Pi reveals that reason and faith can coexist and are necessary for his survival. So how they were both necessary for his survival would be our third body paragraph. And that obviously, as I've stated, would be the points that we are going to discuss for this essay. Now let's look at the body paragraph. You have to have one paragraph for each major point. So for one idea, one paragraph. Never retell the whole story. Only retell the bits of the story or use examples that back up your point and say something like this. This example shows us that. Relate the example back to your point and the essay question. Then make sure that each paragraph follows the Peel outline. Point, explain, evidence, and link. Now let's look at it in practicality. So we've got point. At the novel's opening, the contradictory concepts of faith and reason is prevalent. So that is the point we are making, that we can see faith and reason, the contradictory concepts are there. They are present. That's the point. Now we are explaining this point. In the author's note, the element of faith is introduced when the narrator is told that Pi's story. And now you see how integrated the evidence and the explanation is. So now we are using a quote and we are actually giving textual evidence. Will make you believe in God. In chapter 1, Pi mentions the study of the sloth, citing various sources and giving the scientific biological information about the animal. So if you do not know the precise quote, you are allowed to paraphrase or refer to a specific moment as evidence. Now we're going back to the explanation. You see the integration between the two as I've previously stated? However, he describes the sloth's soothing and spiritually calming nature as reminding him of God. And now we've got a link. We are linking it back to the thesis statement or the topic sentence. Hence, at the outset of the novel, the themes of religion and science are introduced, and the lack of clear boundaries between religion and science or belief and logic are presented. Now let's look at how to structure a conclusion. In the conclusion, never introduce new facts into your conclusion. You are summarizing your key points here. You are not introducing new ideas and new arguments. Here, briefly say what you covered in your essay. As I've said, you summarize your argument. Okay, this is your closing argument. Never use rhetorical questions. So don't ask questions like, can you see that Pi has incorporated both faith and reason? It's not a speech and it weakens your argument. So please do not use any rhetorical questions in your conclusion or the entirety of your literary essay. Also, do not do it throughout your essay, as it weakens your argument and makes the essay read like a speech. Now let's look at it in practice. In conclusion, Pi is able to survive his ordeal by merging his understanding of science and his religious faith. Furthermore, please look at these connecting words like furthermore, additionally. Use these. It often lends itself to the fluency of your essay writing. His creation of Richard Parker as his alter ego and the compromises he makes in terms of his beliefs provide an avenue for him to maintain his humanity at his lowest moments. While science provides the answers to most questions, it cannot explain the complexity of human emotions, and therefore Pi maintains that, at times, one has to have faith and belief, such as the belief in the existence of God without empirical evidence. So, that is how you structure your conclusion appropriately. So, let's go over the conclusion again. I have not introduced any new facts or any new information. I'm simply going to summarize the key elements of my argument that I've already made in the entirety of my essay. Now, remember the following in the writing process. Always give your essay a title. Always write in the present tense. This is crucial for the literary essay. You must write in the present tense. When you mention the name of the play or novel, put it in inverted commas. Unfortunately, you do not have italics when you write, so ensure that you use the inverted commas. In plays, you speak about the audience, and in novels, you speak about the reader. So don't use the we can clearly read. Don't use those personal pronouns. Your language must be formal. no abbreviations, slang or colloquialism. Also remember, no contractions, as that takes away of the formality of your essay. Do not write conversationally. So you guys can clearly see, leave those conversations for the weekend and not for the literary essay. Do not write in the first person. I think. Rather say, so one can see. Your tone, your attitude to the subject must be appropriate. Don't sound arrogant and don't attack your marker. Answering techniques. Place. If need, place the points in chronological order. Make sure that your paragraphs flow from one into the other. Then use connecting words like furthermore, addition, and moreover. And then also use words like contrary, however, conversely, in opposition, and on the other hand. Now, this is how you interpret the rubric. So you will see that there are various categories within this rubric. And you firstly have the exceptional category, and that is if you've really substantiated and written a very in-depth essay. Then you have a skillful category. That is if your essay is well written, but it requires some more additional details. Then a moderate essay is if you just show a basic understanding and a moderate knowledge of the novel that you have studied. Elementary means that you are getting many facts incorrect. You do not know the novel very well, and you are basically just hinting at some correct aspects of the novel. And inadequate says that you do not know the novel at all, and that you really need to go and study the novel thoroughly. Now, we are dealing with a topic that says, Pi's drive for survival is in conflict with his sense of ethical and moral principles. Critically discuss the validity of the above statement in relation to the novel. So, validity means how valid it is. So, how valid is the statement that his drive for survival was in conflict, was in juxtaposition with his sense of ethics and his moral principles? Remember, your essay should never be written in bullet form. So here we do have bullets if you look closely, but it should not be written in bullet form. This is just the marking guidelines that they use bullets. So let's go over some of the marking guidelines and then see how we will incorporate it when writing our essay. When he's stranded on the lifeboat with the tiger, he's faced with the struggle for survival, while at the same time trying to hold on to his sense of morality. Pi's ethical principles are grounded in his faith and his belief in compassion, love, and humanity and dignity. Reverence for all and self-respect. Pi's transformation from a humane person into a bestial survivor suggests that morality is flexible. At first, Pi endeavors to survive while clinging to his principles. He believes he can exist on the rations in the lifeboat and separate himself on his makeshift raft. Pi finds himself unable to face the depths to which a human can sink in order to survive. So what he does is he creates the alter ego Richard Parker. It might be argued that Pi never loses his faith or morality, even though his beliefs are severely compromised. By overcoming his spiritual doubts and adhering to his convictions, Pi is able to transform his faith. The most important lesson that Pi learns is that morality is not a fixed concept. Now, let's look at the introduction. So we start off with a broad statement, as I've previously said. Pi had to sacrifice a major part of his identity as a pacifist and vegetarian to survive his ordeal at sea. A pacifist is someone who loves peace, right? In the novel, Life of Pi, written by Jan Martel, it is evident that Pi's survival instinct stands in direct opposition to his ethical and moral principles. So we've got the thesis statement as indicated here. So we are rephrasing the question, right? This argument will be developed, and here we are saying how our argument will ensue, how it's going to develop, right? The argument will be developed by referring to Pi's moral and ethical principles. So this is going to be our first body paragraph, right? His adoption of an alter ego as a means of survival. So this is going to be our second body paragraph, so referring to Richard Parker as his alter ego. And then the third one, lastly, his savagery and deplorable deeds on the lifeboat. So when you structure and write your body paragraphs, it has to represent the way you listed them in your introduction. So your first body paragraph will have to be on Pi's moral and ethical principles. The second one has to be on the adoption of an alter ego, etc. Now, this is how you're going to structure your body paragraph. Point. Pi initially is a peace-loving boy who follows 3 religions simultaneously. So that means at the same time. These religions govern his life and assist him for survival. However, he must adapt them and oppose them to survive. Now we're going to explain that point. Pi's ethical principles are grounded in his faith and his belief in compassion, love, humanity, dignity, reverence for all, and self-respect. Even when caught in the dire situation, so the dangerous situation, the fatal situation at sea, he still holds on to faith, as is evidenced in the rituals he practices. Now we are giving the evidence, right? Now we are explaining the evidence of these rituals. For example, he has solitary mass without bread or a priest, right? So that's the first evidence. He prays to Allah without knowing where Mecca is, and he uses turtle meat as prasad, a Hindu offering. Now we're explaining it further. However, in order to survive, he has to go against his conscience and resort to acts that undermine his sense of morality. Pi's transformation from a humane person into a bestial survivor suggests that morality is flexible according to one's circumstances. And now we have evidence again. His bestial behavior is seen in how so now we are giving you evidence of this bestial behavior that we referred to in our explanation. Is seen in how he drinks the turtle's blood and how he butchered the Dorado. Linking it back. This makes it clear that although Pi initially was extremely religious and a staunch vegetarian, he compromises and adapts his beliefs to survive at sea. Now, let's look at the conclusion. In conclusion, in order for Pi to survive, he had to contradict his initial moral and ethical principles. This was evidenced by noting his initial principles and character as a pacifist, his adoption of an alter ego to survive, and lastly, his deplorable deeds of cannibalism. Now, remember, your conclusion does not have to be very long. The purpose is simply to summarize, and you should not include any new information. Now, let's look at Dorian Gray. So once again, we are dealing with the memorandum, and we are dealing with the bulleted points on the memo. And now let's look at how to structure our introduction. So firstly, the question is asking, in the picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde shows how the more reprehensible qualities of human beings can destroy people. So the evil qualities, right, of people, the deplorable qualities of human beings can destroy people. Critically assess the validity of the statement. So, the aesthetes of the Victorian society often promoted a hedonistic lifestyle, which caused many characters to expose their reprehensible qualities. So there we've got our opening statement, the broad statement. In the novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, written by Oscar Wilde, it is evident that Wilde shows how the more reprehensible qualities in human beings can lead to the destruction of others. This is evidently clear in Dorian's crude behavior towards Sybil, so this is going to be our first body paragraph, and how it leads to a fatal ending. This is the second one. Additionally, Lord Henry's deplorable beliefs affect Dorian's evil descent, and his influence ultimately causes Dorian to murder Basil. So this is the third one. This essay will reveal that the dishonorable qualities of characters lead to the fatality and demise of others. So there we have our thesis statement, and here we've got the points to discuss. Now, the body paragraph. Let's use Peel. Dorian Gray is introduced to Lord Henry by Basil Hallward, despite Basil not wanting to introduce him. This was because Basil knew of Lord Henry's belief in hedonism. So that is the point. Lord Henry's disregard for the consequences that his controversial statements might have on others reflects his indifferent and insensitive nature. So we're explaining this. This is evident. Do you see here we are presenting, this word already shows you we are introducing evidence here. When Lord Henry comments on Dorian's youth and beauty and does not realize the effect it has on Dorian. Lord Henry is also selfish when he considers using Dorian as a social experiment once introducing him to hedonism. So once again, we have an explanation. This is evident when he takes pleasure in seeing how his ideas influence and corrupt Dorian, and furthermore, when Dorian does not take accountability for his role in Sybil's suicide and instead goes out to dinner the very same evening of finding out about her death. Now, that once again would be evidence. Now we are linking it. Lord Henry can therefore be held indirectly responsible for Dorian's demise and his influence on other people. Now let's look at the conclusion. In conclusion, the reprehensible qualities of Lord Henry, Dorian Gray, and James Vane not only destroys people's reputation and lives in the novel, but often leads to their own demise. So here we have, once again, we've summarized the key points and we are not introducing any new information. Now, before we start looking like tired portraits like Dorian Gray, let's quickly take a commercial break. We'll be back. Welcome back. Now, let's look at another Life of Pi essay. So, the topic here is, in Life of Pi, Jan Martel shows how traumatic experiences can strengthen one's character. So, traumatic experiences can strengthen one's character. Critically assess the validity of the above statement, so how valid it is. The question has two components, very important. Firstly, you must engage with the traumatic experiences, and then you must look at how it strengthens one's character. So, here we've got the bulleted memorandum again, and now we have to obviously construct this into an essay, because as I've previously stated, you may not write a bulleted essay. So, for the introduction paragraph, firstly, we start once again with the broad statement. Pi endures real strife and difficulties as the sole survivor of a shipwreck. He is severely tested for 227 days he is at sea. Right? So now we are speaking about, remember the question is asking us about the traumatic experience, how it strengthens him. So here we have made it known, we've provided some background context. We are making a broad statement that he's a survivor of a shipwreck and he was tested for 227 days, which 22 over 7 equates to pi. In the novel Life of Pi, written by Jan Martel, it is evident that Pi endures great trauma, which ultimately strengthens his character. So for all these introductions, please take note that we have inserted the title of the novel as well as the author. This is evident in the difficult lessons Pi has to learn in his childhood at Pondicherry. So this would be our first body paragraph. Furthermore, he descends into savagery to survive at sea, so that is our second body paragraph, and ultimately has to endure the trauma of Richard Parker's departure. So here, Richard Parker's departure would be our third body paragraph. And that, the blue was our thesis statement, and then the white indicated our points to discuss. Now, let's look at a body paragraph. So, firstly, we are going to once again state our point. The traumatic experiences that Pi endures as a child prepares him for his ultimate survival test at sea. Now, we are providing some evidence, right? So, I know that explanation, according to this, is before or prior to the evidence. But, as I've previously stated, the evidence and the explanation are often very intertwined with each other. So, for example, you see, that indicates to us that we are providing evidence. Pi's father makes Pi and his brother watch Mahisha, the tiger, kill and devour a goat. So very important, in the novel, Mahisha devours the goat and not Richard Parker, as many falsely believe and write. As a vegetarian, Pi is traumatized by this event. However, now we're explaining the evidence a bit further and we are relating it to the point. From this, Pi learns about the danger of anthropomorphizing animals and begins to develop a healthy respect for wild animals. So in your analysis of the novel, you should have known, or you should know what anthropomorphizing is. This knowledge prepares him for his later dealings with Richard Parker. Another example of Pi's childhood trauma is when he's bullied by his peers at St. Joseph's, which causes him untold misery. His ingenious plan to rechristen himself, so that means to rename himself, at Petit Seminar enables him to overcome the teasing. So once again, he is constructing a plan or creating a plan to overcome his obstacles. These experiences develop skills in Pi that allow him to overcome later challenges at sea. So here at the end, we are linking it back to our thesis statement. Now, just one last thing. You may not know an exact quote to use to support what you have stated within your body paragraphs. And you are then allowed to paraphrase or refer to a specific moment within the novel to back your claim. Now, let's look at the conclusion. In conclusion, Pi endures numerous obstacles throughout his life. His traumas begin as early as childhood, continue during his time at sea, and ultimately culminate in Richard Parker's unceremonious departure. These experiences strengthen his character and contribute to both his survival and adaptability as an adult. Very important, you must ensure that in your body paragraphs there is sufficient evidence to support your claims. You must also use quotations from the novel if you know it really well. So if you do not know the quotes very well, then rather paraphrase or refer to specific examples from the novel, as I've previously stated. Now, I think we have been on the algae island for far too long, so let's quickly take a quick commercial break and then we'll be back to wrap things up. Welcome back. Now, let's look at a quick recap and wrap things up. Here are some of the keywords again. Critically discuss means to weigh up the strength and weakness of an idea or statement and respond to it in detail. Critically comment means to make logical connections between ideas and offering your own perspective based on a thorough evaluation, so in detailed evaluation. Validity, to determine how truthful a statement is in order to determine its credibility, so how truthful a statement is. And then justify, give reasons to prove how reasonable a statement is. Now, let's recap some of the key aspects of the various novels. First up, Life of Pi. The setting. The novel has 4 settings. So firstly, part 1 is in Pondicherry, India, part 2 in the Pacific Ocean, part 3 in Mexico, and then also we've got the adult Pi telling his story from Canada to the fictional author. Then we've got a list of characters. We've got Paseen Patel, which is Pi. We've got the fictional author. We've got Richard Parker. We've got Geeta and Orange Juice, the French cook, who's also the hyena, the Taiwanese sailor, who's also the zebra, and some of the other supporting characters. In the plot, Life of Pi by Jan Martel follows Pi Patel, a young vegetarian Indian boy who is stranded on a lifeboat in the Pacific Ocean after a shipwreck. He shares the boat with a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. He descends into savagery as a means of survival. He ultimately survives and he lands up on Mexican shores. The themes. We've got survival, faith, religion, storytelling, and then faith versus reason. The conflict in Life of Pi is the central struggle is Pi being lost at sea on a lifeboat with animals, and the internal and external strife, so the difficulties he has to overcome to ultimately survive. The narration is done by the fictional author, the adult Pi, and then also the younger Pi. Let's look at Dorian Gray's analysis. The setting is primarily in London, and then also within Dorian Gray's lavish townhouse, Basil's studio, he's an artist, Lord Henry Wotton's home, the various opium dens when Dorian becomes quite deplorable, and then the countryside estate. The characters, we've got Dorian, Lord Henry, Basil, Sybil, James, and Alan Campbell. The plot, Dorian is gifted a painting by Basil. He falls in love with the painting. He makes a Faustian bargain, and then this is so that he remains physically youthful and beautiful, but later he becomes morally corrupt, and this leads to his eventual downfall and self-destruction. The major themes, corrupting influence of beauty, the moral decay and the consequences of a hedonistic lifestyle, the superficiality of society, the influence and manipulation, and art and aestheticism versus morality. The conflict is Dorian's struggle between preserving his youthful beauty and his moral consequences of his increasing corrupt and hedonistic lifestyle. This is told by the third-person narrator. Now, let's recap some of the common errors that are made. Learners present a superficial retelling of the story, so regurgitating the plot and not answering the question. They also study past papers and then they force upon the current essay topic. So what they've studied, they just try and squeeze into the current essay topic. Many essays were narrative, so once again, regurgitating plot, and did not formulate an argument. Learners repeated the question statement as an introduction, as well as at the end of each paragraph, which is extremely monotonous. Inadequate or vague references were made to the text to support the argument being developed. So you have to give precise detail to support the points that you're making. Writing the essay and then rewriting it does not constitute to planning. So we've already shown you how to plan correctly. Please make use of a spider diagram or some type of diagram as opposed to just writing a draft and rewriting it. Many learners used language very carelessly, so making unnecessary mistakes, like not capitalizing the beginning of sentences or words, not using inverted commas, or quoting correctly, and then obviously not using the dreaded apostrophe correctly. In some cases, basic plot details were not known and characters were incorrectly identified. And learners would often only summarize the summaries that they were taught or that they went to go research and the film versions of the texts. Now, these are some of the skills that you were taught today in order to equip you when writing your final examination. And these are some of the papers that you can use as practice in preparation for writing your final examination. It was wonderful to be with you today, and I hope that some of the skills you were taught today and the approaches to writing the novel essay you'll be able to utilize and use when writing your final examination. Good luck with paper 2.